Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
Well, I want to welcome everyone back. When we were talking earlier, I mentioned that I called this talk, Let It Go, Let It Go, Let It Go, because I was aware that here we are in the midst of the winter holiday seasons and in the midst of the crux of some really difficult news around the pandemic, as well as perhaps turning the corner. A little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. So it can be a difficult time for many of us. And as I've talked to people in various settings, people tend to have at the top of their mind this idea of, what are we going to do this year? It really might be a little different. So I thought it might be a good idea to make some space to think about that. And how do we let it go? How do we let go those expectations about how things are supposed to be this year? I know this time is not normal. The interesting thing is it's not unprecedented. I don't know if you saw an article earlier this week. It was a story about a woman named Ruth Lux in Iowa. And she found these dozens of letters that her family had written back and forth during the 1918 influenza pandemic. Like now, that winter was a terrible time of loss. And her great-grandmother wrote, "I suppose you've seen that the town is quarantined. It's terrible when there's no church. It didn't seem like Christmas at all." And this may feel a little familiar to us this year. But it also reminds us that our people have been through times like this before, and that we have the capacity to go on, and that there will be better times in the future. But whether or not we celebrate Christmas, or even though we have Zoom to bring us together, many of us may be feeling some nostalgia for how things were before the pandemic. And we may chafe a little bit at the restrictions and wish for the company of our loved ones and friends and want things to be different. And in Buddhist terms, we may be feeling aversion and clinging. And the more we cling, the more we suffer. So in these days when life just isn't the same, I find I'm particularly attached to the way that things used to be and the way I wish they would be. Holidays where there's family around, maybe gatherings with friends, maybe even a normal flu season. I'm wishing for the days when adults could go to work and children could go to school safely. And we all want that return to normal so much that we can almost taste it. These holidays, Thanksgiving has always been my favorite, and I'm really attached to my Thanksgiving traditions. When I think of that holiday, I always think back. I have this picture of my parents' house, the dining room table that everybody would jam into, all of the favorite dishes, getting the china out once a year. And I love that tradition. Then time went on and I had my own family and everybody got older, and it became, I was cooking the dinner, and we gathered all the nieces and nephews and cousins, and it was a big deal at our house too. And I loved it. So it was sort of hard when my daughter took over and she had her own family and started hosting at her house and cooked the same dishes. And then those Thanksgivings with my grandsons became perfect. And then 2020 arrived. And Thanksgiving became dinner with Dan and our dog Winnie, a Zoom call with the kids, and dessert on our neighbor's back porch. And I'm not alone. In fact, I'm very fortunate. This is a Thanksgiving where many people got dinner from a food pantry for the first time, where families gathered on Zoom, where people were grateful if they didn't catch or they recovered from COVID, where if we gathered with friends and families, it may have been outside with coats and gloves, and where many people ate alone or with family members or friends missing from the table. And even if holidays aren't a struggle for you, we've all had to make some adjustments for 2020. So as we enter this winter season, we may be feeling some loss, some suffering, or just plain fatigue. And our tendency to hold on to and cling to those wishes that things would be different can really prolong that suffering. There's a teaching story that illustrates this. It's called Monkey in the Monkey Pot. So in a village in India, some people trap and sell monkeys to be sold as pets. And the method they used was to fasten a piece of rope to a stake. And to the other end, they attach a small pot with a narrow neck. And into the pot, they drop nuts and fruit and they hide out of sight. And soon a band of monkeys comes and discovers the pot with these treats. And one monkey reaches her hand in to grab the treats. But with her hand clenched, she can't pull it back out of the pot, no matter how hard she struggles. So in fear and panic, the monkey creates a ruckus and the hunters come running with their nets in a cage and she's captured. So the villager could be seen as the hunter, the baited pot as his trap, and the monkey as the victim. But there's nothing holding the monkey. She could very easily remove her hand from the pot and rejoin her kin in the treetops if she'd only let go of the nuts and the fruits. If she'd only let go. So like the monkey holding the monkey pot, we can break the link of clinging simply by letting go, but sometimes that just feels impossible. And we can't genuinely let go of something that we resist letting go of. So we may need to spend a little time becoming familiar with what we cling to and understand why we do it. So what do we do? You know, a first step in letting go of clinging is knowing you're doing it. So it can be helpful to know the types of things we cling to so that we can be aware of when we're starting to hang on. The Buddha named 4 things that we cling to. Our sensual pleasures, our creature comforts, like it's too hot, it's too cold, or I want this, or I want that. We cling to our views, our idea of how things should be. We cling to rules and rituals. Sort of, this is the right way to do this, or this is how we celebrate. And we cling to the belief in personality, a strong sense of self. So it can be helpful to recognize our own personal patterns of clinging. What are the types of things we hold on to and have a hard time letting go of? I ask you to take just a minute and think, what are the things I hold on to? What are the stories or the beliefs that make me latch on? And do we notice how we might experience this in our bodies? Perhaps you have some concerns about changes in your life or traditions that might be a little different this year. In my Thanksgiving example, The traditions mean so much to me because they're tied to the stories I tell myself about who I am and my role in my family. You know, I'm the family matriarch, so I have to host Thanksgiving as my mom did. Now, how's that for a gender stereotype? But it's very strong in me. That's a story I tell myself. Thanksgiving traditions keep our family together. Or I can make this holiday perfect if I just do and say all the right things. You know, that superwoman illusion. Notice any patterns here? I notice there's a lot of I, me, mine thinking, a lot of resisting change, and a lot of taking responsibility for keeping the world on its axis. And these beliefs and stories, they cause me to be stuck, to resist change, even when it's needed. And that causes me to suffer. So once we're aware of the things we cling to, what can we do about that? Well, it often helps to alleviate our suffering to look to the two wings of the practice, wisdom and compassion. And the wisdom practices guide us through the teachings, and compassion gives us the heart practices to care for ourselves and others. So wisdom practice asks us to look at the nature of clinging, often found in the three characteristics of existence: suffering, impermanence, and non-self. With impermanence, wisdom tells us that if we're having trouble letting go, it can be helpful to meditate on the nature of impermanence, because meditation allows us to see directly, moment to moment, that things are constantly changing. And we can sort of recognize that everything changes all the time. And it becomes clear that clinging is futile. They say that suffering is a rope burn, trying to hold on to how things are and resisting change. My evolving Thanksgiving traditions, each style had their time, and they'll continue to evolve in the future. And this year was just 1 year in the context of a lifetime of family holidays. There will be more. So reflecting on impermanence can help sort of enlarge our context and sort of loosens the attachment that we have. It's said that one reason that older people may be coping a little better with COVID restrictions, beyond the fact that they have the ability to stay home, is they have the perspective to know that this too shall pass, and to have a larger context. The selflessness, the wisdom practices remind us to contemplate on the selfless nature of all phenomena, which is a little bit hard to wrap our heads around. But it might look like not taking things personally, or not seeing the world revolving around us. And one of the ways that this sense of self shows up in our language is, and in our thinking, is that we notice all those I statements. I am, or I want, or I must. I always host the holidays. So when we get caught in clinging, we can try making a slight change to our language. And by changing to passive language, we can pull that I out of it. And as we notice our thoughts or our feelings, we can try in a passive way saying, there is wanting, or wanting is happening. Sadness is arising, or sadness is like this. It's the difference between the mind clinging to an experience and owning it and identifying with it, or not. So that little thing of just training ourselves to change our inner language when we get caught, to take the I out of it can sometimes soften our grip on what we see as I or mine. And finally, wisdom tells us that the nature of life often feels unsatisfactory to us because we can't count on anything staying a certain way. And suffering comes when we resist that change. But we can reduce that suffering and turn down our resistance when we accept that nothing is perfect, and we can stop clinging to that illusion or our expectation that things should be perfect or the way they've always been. But suffering's hard, and we need to support ourselves. We need to acknowledge that it can be hard. And there are some things we can do that help to tone down that clinging. We can recognize clinging as it comes up and not go there. If we find there are thoughts that are really hard for us, rather than going back to them over and over, we don't have to crush those feelings or thoughts, but we just don't feed them. And like a fire without fuel, the thoughts we don't foster can shrink and fade away. So just being aware. And is it time to turn our attention and not linger on thoughts that are hard for us? We can know that we hold stress in our bodies and attend to self-care to allow our bodies to give us messages when we need help, when we need attention, when we need compassion. We can connect with loved ones, even if we have to do it at a distance, with our spiritual friends, with our family, sharing and receiving loving support for what we're going through, if we acknowledge that it's a hard time. And we can turn to the things that bring us joy and give ourselves permission to experience the joy we can, even in the midst of this difficult time. So turning to gratitude practice, looking for joy, and intentionally spending time there. So the wisdom practices give us suggestions and techniques for how to let go of our suffering. But to fully let go and unclench our hands and let go of resistance, we need to acknowledge how we feel. What we can feel, we can heal. And healing calls for the heart practices of compassion, particularly self-compassion and loving kindness. Lots and lots of loving kindness. So letting go begins with letting be. Seeing and knowing what we struggle with and be willing to spend some time with it and caring for ourselves. Investigating the stories we tell ourselves that make us suffer and giving ourselves some compassion for any sadness or loss that we may feel. So I'd like to ask you to join me in a short reflection. I'd like to do a brief self-compassion break. It's a tool we can turn to when we notice that things are bothering us and we'd like to step back, notice what's going on, spend some time with it. So I'd like to invite you to get settled in, and you may wish to close your eyes or just gaze downward. And we're just going to spend a few minutes thinking about this and bringing to mind a current situation in which you feel unsettled or stuck. Perhaps wishing things were different, or something else you feel stuck on. And see if you can visualize the situation, the story, perhaps a reaction that you feel attached to or struggle with. And just noticing what is happening inside now. If you're aware of any emotions or thoughts, perhaps there's a sense of how that feels in your body, perhaps some tension or constriction or heaviness. Just allowing yourself to feel how it feels. And pause and see whether you can just allow that feeling to soften. Letting the muscles soften around the edges. Let go a little. Perhaps you can allow a little ease in. Releasing any tension with each breath. You might ask, what do I need right now? How can I be kind to myself when I experience this? Perhaps placing a hand on your heart or on the part of the body where you feel sensation. Sending yourself some comfort, just as you would a good friend who is suffering. You might say, this is a difficult time. Or I care about this suffering. Or I am not alone. This is how it feels when people are struggling this way. Or may I be kind to myself? When we're ready, it can be helpful to notice how it feels to relax and set the burden down. Do I have to hold on to this struggle? Is it time to let this go, even for now? You might thank yourself for taking a quiet moment to look inward and care for yourself. And if there's something that needs more time, make a mental note to return here, to be with it, and to show yourself some compassion. At times like these, we need lots of self-compassion. Well, thank you for taking the time for that. We're going to just coming back. We acknowledge letting go is a process. And we may not be able to change things or affect the outcome, but we might be able to soften into a sense of allowing and just release some of that grasping in our body and our mind. I always love what Ajahn Chah says, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go more, you will have more peace. And if you let go completely, whatever happens, your heart will be free. So let's finish with a little story about letting go. So I was out kayaking in the reservoir when this leaf floated down. I don't know if you can see it, and it landed by me. It's all curled up, dried up leaf. And I looked at it and I immediately thought, look, that leaf didn't want to let go. Its edges are all curled up as though it was holding on to that tree and it didn't want to let go. And of course I thought that because that's how clinging to things that I really, really want feels to me. And my personal clinging of choice is to worry about things. And so worrying can appear in my body like this sense of holding tightly with clenched hands. And letting go can feel like opening those hands and allowing and receiving. But perhaps this leaf wasn't clinging and unhappy. Perhaps it was very happy to let go. And perhaps it understood the wisdom teachings. Thich Nhat Hanh tells this story of the leaf. He said, I asked the leaf whether it was frightened because it was autumn and the other leaves were falling. And the leaf told me no. During the whole spring and summer, I was completely alive. I worked hard to help nourish the tree, and now much of me is in the tree. I'm not limited by this form. I'm also the whole tree, and when I go back to the soil, I will continue to nourish the tree, so I don't worry at all. As I leave this branch and float to the ground, I will wave to the tree and tell her, I will see you very soon. And that day there was a wind blowing, and after a while I saw the leaf leave the branch and float down to the soil, dancing joyfully, because as it floated, it saw itself already there in the tree. It was so happy. I bowed my head, knowing that I have a lot to learn from the leaf. So it appears that this wise leaf understood that seasons begin and end, that the natural course of life is not to be mourned. It understood its important role in the larger story of the life of the tree. So faced with a world where we can't change the facts, we can't make things go the way we wish they would, we're left with the options of letting be and letting go, or suffering from the rope burn of wishing things were different. They say the fruit of liberation is to see the world of things as they are. So, caring for ourselves this season, I'd like to suggest we might want to ask ourselves a couple of questions in the coming weeks. We might want to ask, what is between me and feeling peaceful? And is there something I could let go of to have a little more peace? What is between me and feeling peaceful? And is there something I could let go of to have a little more peace? So I'm wishing you all blessings this holiday season and wishing you peace and freedom and joy.